It was a quiet Saturday night, the kind of evening that promised nothing out of the ordinary. My friends and I, a group of rebellious 12-year-olds, had made a tradition of spending our weekends at the local bowling alley. It wasn't much, just a small, dimly lit place down the block where the scent of greasy pizza and the clatter of pins would fill the air, making us forget the world for a while. The lanes were cheap, and so was the food, perfect for us kids who didn't have much of an allowance. We weren't the only ones who enjoyed this spot, though. The alley was always packed on the weekends, and occasionally we'd spot some familiar faces. One of those faces belonged to an older man we called Creeper Bob. It was a nickname we'd given him after we'd noticed his peculiar habit of walking down the entire bowling alley, passing by every lane, watching everyone as they bowled. He'd always end up at his own lane, all by himself, an eerie presence among the chatter and laughter of the other patrons. At first, we thought he was just a regular, but over time, it became clear that something about him didn't sit right. There was a strange intensity in his gaze, a hunger behind his eyes. We'd seen him multiple times, but tonight, something was different. He was sitting alone, just a few lanes away from us. We'd already been playing for an hour when he approached, shuffling toward our group with an unsettling, slow gait. "Hey there, boys," he called out, his voice raspy, as if he'd been talking to himself for far too long. "Nice form, but you could use a little guidance." We exchanged awkward glances, uncomfortable with his sudden presence. We tried to ignore him, but it wasn't long before he hovered closer, making unsolicited comments about our technique. The man had no shame, interrupting our conversation every few seconds to share something weird about himself. How long he'd been coming here, how he loved watching young bowlers, how it had been his favorite pastime for decades. But then he said something that sent a shiver down my spine. "You guys come here every weekend, right?" He smiled, a tight-lipped grin that barely concealed something darker. "I watch you every time. You're like clockwork." My stomach twisted. There was something off about this man. His presence, the way he made us feel like animals in a zoo. Before any of us could say anything, he made his move. As I stepped up to bowl, I felt his hand on my wrist. He gripped it, guiding my arm in a way that felt intrusive and unwanted. "Here, let me show you how to position your hand," he muttered, his fingers cold and clammy against my skin. I yanked my arm away, my heart pounding in my chest. None of us said anything. We were too stunned, too confused to respond. What did we do now? Tell him to leave? Or just pretend it hadn't happened? After what felt like an eternity, Creeper Bob returned to his lane, but the damage was already done. The mood had shifted. It was no longer a fun night of bowling. It was an uncomfortable, suffocating experience that none of us wanted to be a part of anymore. We decided to cut our night short. The money we'd saved for more games was spent on a pizza at a nearby restaurant, as far from the bowling alley as we could get. As we walked down the street to head home, we felt the weight of the night's events still hanging in the air. Jacob and Mikey turned down a different street, leaving Josh and me to continue down our path. But then, the sound of an engine revving behind us made us stop. We both turned around and saw an old beat-up SUV, a Ford Explorer, slowly creeping up the street. Our hearts sank. Sure enough, it was him, Creeper Bob. The car pulled up beside us, and the window rolled down. "Hey there, kids," he called out, his voice too cheery for the situation. "Need a ride home?" We stared at him incredulous. "No thanks," Josh said firmly. But Bob wasn't deterred. He leaned out of the window, his eyes glinting unnervingly. "It's not safe for two kids to be walking around at this time of night. I could give you a ride home, make sure you're safe." We exchanged another glance. How old did he think we were? We weren't little kids. We weren't going to fall for that trick. "No, we're good," I said, my voice shaking despite myself. Bob didn't seem to take no for an answer. He pulled over to the side of the road, parking the car. Josh and I exchanged a look of panic. This wasn't right. We started walking faster, our footsteps quickening, trying to shake him off. But the SUV started moving again, following us at a slow crawl. I could feel my heart racing, each step heavier than the last. "Come on, boys," Bob called out, still trying to coax us into his car. "I insist. It's not safe out here." That was the final straw. We broke into a run, not caring about anything else except getting away from him. We ran for blocks, only stopping when we reached the intersection where Josh and I would split off to head to our homes. We said our goodbyes, and I continued my jog home, my breath ragged from the effort. When I got to the back of the house, I noticed something, a sound. Footsteps behind me. My heart dropped. I didn't turn around to look. I should have listened to my gut. I went to unlock the back door, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the key. But just as I pulled the door open, something or someone shoved me forward. I was thrown inside the house, my mouth clamped shut by a cold hand. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, couldn't move. I scratched and clawed at the hand, trying to free myself. Finally, in a desperate gasp, I managed to scream, "Dad!" The hand loosened just enough for me to break free, and I bolted up the stairs. I didn't dare look back. "Dad!" I yelled, my voice hoarse, as I pounded on his bedroom door. My father burst out, wide-eyed, and I told him what had just happened. We rushed outside, checking the backyard, but there was no sign of the man. My dad immediately called the police and filed a report, but the bowling alley refused to release the surveillance footage from that night. My mum found out about what happened, and from that moment on, I was never allowed to go back there again. Not that I ever wanted to. As for Creeper Bob, I can't say with absolute certainty that it was him who had attacked me that night. But honestly, how slim were the chances that it wasn't? It was a week after the incident with Creeper Bob, and I thought I had finally put that nightmare behind me. But as life would have it, the darkness had only just begun to spread its fingers. We were a rowdy group of teenagers, still recovering from the disturbing events at the bowling alley, but that wasn't enough to keep us out of trouble. The thirst for adventure and mischief always came back, stronger than ever. It all started with Rowan. He had a new job, of course. He couldn't seem to stick to anything. But this job, as a night attendant at another bowling alley in a nearby town, seemed to offer something we couldn't resist: access. He had the keys to close up, the kind of power every curious teenager dreams of. And as always, Anish was the first to jump on the opportunity. If there was one person who could talk anyone into doing anything, it was him. "I dare you guys to come," he urged, leaning forward on his seat. His smile was infectious, and despite everything that had happened, I felt that old excitement creeping in. It was a dumb idea, but that's exactly what made it fun. "Imagine the stuff we could explore in there," Anish continued, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "There's bound to be some hidden rooms or something." It was late. Too late, honestly. But Rowan had the key, and none of us had any real reason not to go. Even Chip, the cautious one of the group, gave in with a reluctant shrug. He knew, as well as the rest of us, that this would be a night to remember. And so, we piled into Jason's BMW, all of us with more than a few drinks under our belts. Except for Jason, of course. He was the designated driver, though it wasn't exactly by choice. The bowling alley was dark and empty when we arrived, its fluorescent lights flickering like something out of a horror movie. I remember that moment when Rowan unlocked the door. The sound of the old metal door, creaking open, echoed through the silent alley. The kind of noise that makes you realize just how quiet everything is when no one else is around. We shuffled inside, joking and laughing, but the fun didn't last long. After a few games of makeshift sliding down the lanes, an idea I wholeheartedly supported at the time, we grew bored. We decided to explore the building to see what secrets it might hold. Rowan led us to the employee-only area, his footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. "This way," he muttered, unlocking a door to what appeared to be a storage room. It was just full of old bowling balls, cleaning supplies, and a few forgotten posters from years ago. Nothing special, but we didn't care. We were stupid, drunk, and on a mission to find something interesting. "Is there a basement?" Jason asked, his curiosity piqued. He was always the practical one, but tonight, the alcohol had loosened him up. Rowan paused, looking at Jason with a confused frown. "I've never heard of one," he said. "There shouldn't be." We weren't convinced, so we started poking around more aggressively, flipping over boxes and rummaging through piles of forgotten junk. That's when we heard it. A loud bump that made all of us freeze. Jason's voice broke the silence. "Did you hear that?" "I didn't think this place had a basement," I muttered, but my voice was shaking. Something felt wrong. The noise had come from below us. We stood there for a moment, staring at each other in disbelief. Chip was the first to speak up, his voice small and anxious. "We should leave. This is stupid." But Anish wasn't having any of it. "No, we're going down there," he said, grinning as if he had just won a victory. We followed him reluctantly, but no one dared to back out now. Jason lifted a corner of a rug, revealing a trap door. The air seemed to thicken around us as we stared at the rusted ladder leading down into the unknown. There was no way back now. Jason moved first, throwing the door open and shining his phone's flashlight down the dark tunnel. Without hesitation, he started climbing down. "Wait!" Chip's voice was tight, but Jason was already descending. Anish followed, right behind, and I reluctantly stepped forward, my legs heavy, the alcohol making everything feel surreal. The basement was colder than I expected. The air smelled musty, like something had been left untouched for years. The floor was cluttered with dusty cardboard boxes and forgotten items, but there was something off about it. It didn't feel like a normal storage area. The whole space seemed off. "That's it," I whispered, glancing around. "We should go back." But as soon as I said it, I heard it again, the same bump we'd heard earlier. We froze, our eyes wide with fear. Anish was the first to move. He darted toward a door at the far end of the room. "I'm going to check it out," he said, his voice excited. I wanted to argue, but my body moved on its own. The curiosity, the alcohol, it all fed into my reckless behavior. The four of us approached the door slowly, the silence growing heavier with each step. Jason put his hand on the handle, his breath shallow. "This is a bad idea," he said quietly, but it was too late. With a slow, deliberate motion, Jason opened the door. My phone's flashlight revealed an even darker room and at first, it looked like nothing more than more boxes and old furniture. But then we saw it. In the far corner, sitting with its legs crossed, was a figure. At first, I thought it was just another cardboard figure, a mannequin or some junk. But then the figure moved, slowly, deliberately. The person began banging their head against the wall, over and over, with sickening thuds that echoed in the small enclosed space. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't some forgotten object or pile of junk. This was real. Anish was the first to turn. "Let's go," he whispered harshly. But I could see his legs shaking, his face pale with terror. We backed up, moving quietly. Rowan tripped on a piece of debris, and with a curse, the figure in the corner screamed, a sound so primal and full of rage that it made my stomach turn. The chase was on. We ran for the ladder. Jason and I climbed up first, not bothering to look back, but I could hear the others scrambling behind us. Just as Rowan was halfway up, the figure reached out, grabbing him. I didn't know what it was, but I knew we were in real danger. Chip grabbed Rowan, yanking him upward, just as something, a metal pipe, was thrown down from the dark. The sound of it clanging against the metal rungs sent chills down my spine. We didn't stop running until we were outside, gasping for air. Jason's hands were shaking as he locked the door behind us. Rowan was still panting, eyes wide with fear. The car ride back was silent, and when Rowan spoke, his voice was hoarse. I don't know who that was down there, but I know one thing: he wasn't supposed to be there. None of us said anything after that. We were all too scared to speak, our minds still reeling from what had just happened. We dropped Rowan off, and he quit the next day without even telling his boss why. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever we had stumbled across that night, it was far darker than we ever could have imagined. It had been a few weeks since the nightmare at the bowling alley basement. Rowan quit his job, and none of us ever spoke about that night again. The adrenaline, the terror, it all seemed to fade into the background as life moved on. At least on the surface, but deep down, I knew something was still lurking. I could feel it. I tried to shake off the unease that had settled over me like a heavy fog. I told myself that things were back to normal, that I was just being paranoid. But the feeling stuck. It was like I had awakened something that night, something I couldn't undo. Rebecca, my girlfriend, noticed my mood. She tried to cheer me up, planning small dates here and there, trying to get me to focus on something other than the lingering thoughts. It worked, at least for a while. One Saturday night, she suggested we go bowling. I had laughed it off at first. Bowling? After everything that had happened? But she was persistent, and honestly, I just wanted to make her happy. I didn't want to admit that I was still scared, still haunted by the thought of that man in the basement. So we went. We drove to the closest bowling alley, rented shoes, and picked out our balls. We were both terrible at it, but we didn't care. The night was supposed to be fun, just a simple date. But as soon as we stepped into the alley, something felt wrong. We weren't even halfway through our game when Rebecca's ex-boyfriend walked in. I froze. I hadn't expected him to show up, and neither had she. It was awkward, to say the least. He was with a group of friends, and they quickly made their way to a nearby lane. Rebecca tensed up beside me, her eyes darting around, refusing to meet his gaze. I could feel her discomfort, the way her body stiffened every time she glanced in their direction. And then she whispered to me, her voice barely audible, "We need to leave." Now, I didn't understand at first, But when I looked over at him, I saw the tension on her face. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want to see him. So we left. No more bowling, no more fun. Rebecca retreated to the car, and I returned the shoes, trying to act normal. That's when I saw him, Rebecca's ex, looking right at me. He didn't say anything. He just stared, like he was sizing me up. I could feel my stomach twist with unease, but I didn't say anything to Rebecca. She didn't need to know. We drove home quietly, neither of us saying a word. We both knew why. There was a strange tension between us, as though the night had lost its luster before it had even begun. When we got home, we decided to play some Wii bowling instead. It seemed like a better idea anyway. Safer, less stressful. We cracked open a bottle of wine and settled into the couch, hoping to salvage what was left of the night. The music played softly in the background, the sound of the game and our laughter filling the room. It was when the song we were listening to ended that it happened. A heavy thud echoed from upstairs, the kind of sound that cuts through silence like a knife. I froze, my eyes locking with Rebecca's. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, my heart suddenly racing. The sound had come from above us. It sounded like something heavy had been dropped. "Stay here," I said, my voice low but firm. I went upstairs, my mind racing, trying to think of an explanation. Maybe something had fallen off a shelf. Maybe it was just the house settling. But when I reached the top of the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I checked every room, every closet, under the beds. Nothing. No sign of anything out of place. I exhaled, relieved, but still uneasy. It didn't make sense. Why would something make such a loud noise, but leave no trace? It was unsettling, but I brushed it off, hoping I was just being paranoid. I returned downstairs and told Rebecca it was nothing, that I'd checked everything. We settled back into the living room, and after a while, she fell asleep on the couch. I stayed up, sipping my wine and playing a few more rounds of Wii bowling. But then a second thud came, louder this time, clearer. It was unmistakable. The sound of something heavy being dropped. I froze again, a cold sweat prickling along my skin. I didn't want to wake Rebecca. I didn't want to scare her, but I had to know what it was. I stood up slowly and walked toward the stairs, my mind racing. The attic door was just outside my bedroom, one of those old pull-down ladders with the string hanging down. I reached for the string, my hands trembling slightly, and pulled it down. The ladder creaked as it lowered, the dark abyss above me beckoning. The house was silent again, and for a moment, I thought maybe I had imagined the noise. But then I heard it, a soft, creaking sound from above. Something or someone was moving around up there. My pulse quickened. What if it was an animal, a raccoon, or a squirrel? It would explain the noise. I grabbed a broom from the closet for protection, my heart pounding as I climbed the ladder. I reached the top slowly, careful not to make a sound. I stopped, straining my ears. Then I heard it, the soft creak of a rocking chair. I shone my phone's flashlight toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. The chair was moving, rocking back and forth, but there was someone sitting in it. A person. I nearly lost my grip on the ladder. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the figure in the chair, barely able to make out their form in the dim light. "Who are you?" I managed to croak, my voice shaking. The person didn't answer. They simply turned their head slowly toward me. What I saw nearly made me fall backward off the ladder. It was a man. His face was gaunt, his hair a tangled mess. His eyes wide with a kind of madness I couldn't describe. His lips curled into a twisted grin, and before I knew it, he stood up. He let out a low, guttural growl, a sound I couldn't even place. It was animalistic, terrifying. I didn't wait another second. I scrambled down the ladder, my heart pounding in my chest. The man behind me followed. "Rebecca!" I screamed as I slammed the attic door shut behind me. "Call the cops, now!" I didn't dare look back, but I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in. I pushed the attic door up with all my strength, my arms aching from the pressure. I heard him banging on the door, his heavy footsteps growing closer. "Call the cops," I repeated, my voice shaking with fear. Rebecca stumbled out of the bedroom, panic in her eyes as she saw me struggling with the door. She grabbed her phone and dialed, her voice trembling as she spoke to the operator. I held the door as tightly as I could, waiting for the police. Every moment felt like an eternity. When they finally arrived, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The police went upstairs to the attic. I stayed downstairs, too terrified to move. It didn't take long for them to bring him down. The man was handcuffed, his eyes wild and filled with an unsettling mix of confusion and rage. He stared at me with a gaze that would haunt me forever, sick, twisted, and full of hatred. The officers led him out of the house, and I watched him go, wondering if I would ever feel safe again. The silence that followed was deafening, but even as the police left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't over yet. The man was gone, but what had led him to our house? Why was he in the attic? I didn't have answers. All I knew was that we had narrowly escaped whatever darkness was lurking just beyond the edges of our world. It's strange how quickly things can shift back to normal. The night the police took that man away was the end of the immediate nightmare, but I'd never feel quite the same again. Rebecca and I spent the rest of the evening in silence, our hearts still heavy with the shock of what had happened. The cops had taken the man, but we hadn't pressed charges. There was something unsettling about him, a dangerous air about the whole situation. But he'd been removed, and that should have been enough. But I couldn't escape the feeling that something had been left unfinished. The whole thing, the bowling alley, the basement, the man in the attic, it all felt connected, like one dark thread woven through our lives, pulling us into something bigger than we could understand. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the idea that this wasn't just some random series of events. Rebecca was scared too. She wasn't the same after that night. She used to be the type to shrug off strange noises or weird happenings. But now, every sound seemed to make her jump. The little things, the creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the wind through the trees, became a constant source of anxiety. It was like we were both walking on eggshells, afraid that at any moment, the past would come rushing back. I tried to go back to my normal life, back to school, to hanging out with my friends, but nothing felt the same. Jacob and Josh would talk about their weekends, but all I could think about was that face in the attic, that twisted, grinning face that still haunted my dreams. Then, a month later, something happened that changed everything. I got a call from the police. They were following up on the man we had found in the attic, the one who had nearly torn our lives apart. The officers said they had been able to track him down, and they had uncovered something strange. He wasn't just some random homeless man. They had found a list of addresses. Our address included scribbled in a notebook he had on him when he was arrested, along with a series of names. I felt the blood drain from my face. Why us? Why had he targeted our house? The police had no answers for me. They just said it was possible he had been watching us for a while, but they couldn't piece together why we were on his list. It was a dead end. But the unease didn't end there. It felt like a part of me had been left in the dark, unable to escape the questions that gnawed at me. Who was this man? What had brought him to our house? What was he after? I went to the bowling alley again, not out of any sense of adventure or curiosity, more out of necessity. I had to know if it was connected. It had to be. The place seemed emptier than I remembered, like it was just a shell of what it once was. The lights buzzed in the quiet, and the faint sound of pins crashing echoed in the distance. The alley was closed when I arrived, but I stood there in front of the door for what felt like hours, staring at the empty parking lot. It was a stupid idea, but I had to know. Just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping in my chest, but it was just the night janitor, a man I had seen there once or twice before, with a broom in hand. "You all right, kid?" he asked, his voice raspy from years of smoking. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just thinking. You know, they say this place is haunted." He chuckled, his breath clouding in the cool night air. "They say things happen here that you can't explain." I forced another smile, my stomach churning. "Yeah, I've heard that." "I've seen it," he said suddenly, his eyes narrowing. "People don't just disappear for no reason. Something's not right with this place, kid. Some things are better left alone." The words stuck with me long after I left, like a bitter taste on my tongue. I didn't know if the janitor knew more than he was saying, or if he was just a man spouting nonsense to amuse himself, but I couldn't ignore the shiver that ran down my spine. The truth was, I had never really felt like I was alone since that night. Every shadow seemed deeper, every creak of the floor a reminder that something was always watching, waiting. We moved out of that house a few months later. I didn't tell Rebecca why. I just knew it was time. I couldn't sleep at night anymore, couldn't shake the paranoia. I didn't feel safe, not with the lingering thought that someone or something was still out there. And though we moved, I could never fully escape the haunting memories. Creeper Bob, the man in the attic, the basement with the hidden door. All of it. The terror, the unanswered questions followed me wherever I went. I couldn't help but wonder if the truth was still out there, buried in the walls of that old bowling alley, or hiding in the shadows of our past, waiting for someone to find it. But maybe that was just it. Maybe some things were never meant to be found. And maybe that was the only peace I would ever have.